Hey, he's waking up. Something was pressed up against my face. I barely had time to register the sound of a car engine before I passed out again. Where? Uh, where am I? I looked down, horrified to see only shackles. I couldn't see anyone else. Hello? Suddenly, a cheerful voice rang through the speakers placed around the room. Good evening and welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, have I got a treat for you. He's fresh, healthy, and alert. I'm sure he'll be versatile enough to fulfill any of your needs. Now, I'm sure you all know the drill. I'll start asking questions and you lovely folks can begin bidding at any time. Get on with it. Shut up unless you're bidding. You sound like a hag, you little shit. I bet you can't even afford anything here. Get back to... Now. Shouldn't we save our passion for the main event? For a moment, the voices went silent. Shall we ask your item some questions and begin the bidding? Yes, please. Excellent. Let's begin. We'll start the bidding at 100. I wondered briefly about what 100 even was. I decided I didn't want to know what I was worth. Here's our first question. What are you doing here? How the hell should I know? 110. Wonderful. Now, do you consider yourself to be athletic? There was no point in lying. Not really. 130. Here's a fun one. Are you scared? What the hell kinds of questions are these? I made sure to speak clearly and keep my back straight. No, I'm not scared of you people. 160. Okay, let's see. How much money do you make? I get by. Good. Okay. How well do you follow instructions? I can follow instructions just fine. Oh, 170. Oh, this one's interesting. Are you a virgin? Don't worry. Just a couple left. Do you enjoy camping? I stood there, stunned for a moment. What does that have to do with any of this? I love camping, I scoffed quietly. Was one of these weirdos wanting to take me camping? 220. All right. You're doing wonderfully. Last question. Who would you like to go home with? What? I looked at the windows across from me in the dark room. Whoever the two in the blue and red windows were, they both gave me a bad feeling. If they were that rude to each other, I probably don't stand a chance. I might as well go with the more polite one. I pointed to the green window. Can't take the stuck-up blue window bitch either, huh? Jesus, you really can't keep your mouth shut, can you? Are you really one to talk? With all that money, I bet your mouth's open all the time. You disgusting little prick. You call me little one more time. I'm gonna have to show you. 720. The low voice growled through the room. Both of the other windows went silent. Even the announcer seemed to be stunned. No more bids then. The voice quieted down gruffly. Good. The announcer took a moment to regain his composure. I hear 720. Anyone else? Sold! To my robust friend in the green. We'll prepare the shipment to send out with you right away. Thank you very much for coming. Shipment? What did that mean? I felt a sharp jab in my ankle. Oh, I tried to bend down to inspect the pain, but I just crumpled to the floor. There was a pain in my leg, and I couldn't move. I was seeing double and trying to speak. I passed out. I woke up coughing. It's cold. Huh? I can't see. I took a moment to try and get my bearings. I'm lying down. My hands are tied and I'm blindfolded. I push down at the wave of panic rising in my chest. I'm wearing something warm, but a cold wind is biting at my face and hands. I'm definitely outside. Oh. My panic exploded from my control as I heard the gruff voice and heavy footsteps approaching. Look at you, already awake. I felt the nudge of a boot and tried to get away from it. Who are you? Where am I? I tried to keep the panic out of my voice, but it bled through anyway. Huh? Looks like you're about ready, yeah? I could hear the heavy footsteps slowly circle my body. Now, the suits gave me a name for you. Anon, is that right? Before I could answer, he continued. Anyway, suppose we might as well have it even. You could call me Mason, if you're the talking sort. Now, I'm gonna be taking the blindfold off. Stand up. I might as well comply. It's not like I have much of a choice. I awkwardly scrambled before managing to get up into a kneeling position. I took a deep breath and shakily got onto one foot, and then the other. I half expected him to say something about how long I was taking, yet I only heard silence. The crunch of a twig told me he'd gotten very close. That's better. A hand gripped my blindfold. I stepped back as my eyes adjusted. The sky is huge. My eyes darted everywhere, trying to gather as much information as I could. I looked down at myself and saw clothing I've never seen before. I was wearing a warm outfit and coat. What the hell? Yeah. It's a little late in the year. My attention snapped back to him. Your job is to survive. Mountain's a dangerous place, understand? To my surprise, he held out a small backpack. Supplies for the mountain. I cautiously grabbed the backpack. I should probably take anything I can at this point. I pulled the backpack over my arms and looked to him. He nodded in approval. All right. He grabbed something from behind him. Run. I turned around, screaming internally at my body to move faster. I stumbled over roots, cursing my stiff legs. What the fuck was that? A crossbow? Just as I began to manage my muscles and the pounding blood in my ears, I heard a crack in front of me. I glanced to the side, just in time to see a crossbow bolt lodge deep in the tree beside me. I ran even faster than I knew I could. He's trying to kill me. I don't know how long I ran for. I ran until my lungs felt like they were full of glass shards. I slowed, but I kept moving, sucking in cold air and forcing my aching limbs to move. Something caught my dragging feet, and I fell to the ground. I laid there, shaking, trying to process what was happening. I listened for him. Nothing. Just wind through the trees. I took a few deep breaths and looked around myself. Everything looked the same. just trees and mountains. I held my arms close and tried to stay calm. The autumn cold was biting. It's colder than it looks out here. I have to find some way to get warm, or that crossbow will be the last of my problems. I could look through what I have, or keep moving. Something was wrong. I looked around myself, trying to find the source of my unease. The birds. The animals weren't making any sound. I was knocked to my knees. Then I felt the pain. I gripped the ground and half stifled a scream. I looked down and could see the tip of a crossbow bolt protruding from the front of my thigh. I quickly whipped around, trying to see where it came from. He's here. I saw the slightest movement from behind a tree. I turned on my heel and ran as fast as I could. The pain seemed to fade away with the fear and adrenaline. I ran for as long as I could. My foot began to drag, and my leg was no longer obeying me. I heaved, unsure of how long I'd actually been running. I slumped to the ground, my heart pounding. My leg was covered in blood. I think I got away. I glanced down at my bloody leg while catching my breath. I can't keep running with this. I gripped the tip poking out of my pant leg in the front. All the pain came flooding back. I clenched my teeth and pulled hard. Thankfully, the bolt came out fairly easily. I held my leg with as much pressure as I could, hoping that it would stop the bleeding. Judging by the slow ooze of blood, it hadn't managed to hit any major artery. I breathed slowly on the ground, clutching my leg. I've made it into the trees. I searched around for some small dry bits to start my fire with. Luckily, there seemed to be plenty to work with. I gathered some wood and started to work with the flint. As the sparks caught the tinder, I felt a sigh of relief. The warmth from the flickering light reached my hands and filled me with comfort. I relaxed by the fire. The sound of the fire crackling seemed a bit hypnotic. I stared into the flames as my muscles relaxed from the tension I didn't realize I had. For a moment, I could imagine I was just camping. That everything was okay. It made it easy to nearly miss the crack that came from behind me. I couldn't turn around in time to see the large hands that knocked me to the ground. The force and weight behind the tackle left me unable to take in a breath. As I tried in vain to take in a single gulp of air, I stared into the embers of the fire, only inches from my face. "What were you thinking?" He pressed on the back of my neck, though it meant little since I couldn't even move my chest. "You should have known better. Could see the smoke from the other side of the valley, I bet," I replied with a rasping inhale, just barely managing to finally take in some air. I could feel his hand wrap around the back of my head. He pushed my face grinding on the dirt, closer to the embers. The intense heat became blistering and I panicked. I squirmed with all the adrenaline I could muster. I tried to move my arms, legs, a kick, or an elbow, anything. He was too heavy. I writhed under him, not even able to fully scream. He seemed to enjoy the sound of my hoarse, panicked cry. I could feel my skin burning. I tried to jerk away under him. "Squirm." I froze. Something about the tone of his voice changed. "I told you to squirm," I screamed as the blade of a knife plunged into my shoulder from behind. My cry wavered as I instinctually moved my arm, only amplifying the pain. I didn't notice his weight lift from me or the sound of rustling clothing. It wasn't until I heard the blade sawing through the back of my pants that I realized his intention had shifted. In a split second, the shock of cold air hit my skin. I tried to lunge forward, but his large hand grabbed the back of my head. He slammed me face down into the ground. Once again, I was reminded of the coals right next to my face. I let out a choked whine as I tried to get away from the fire. That's better. Something thick and hot was pressed between my legs. No. For a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of the two threats or decide which direction to try and flee. But that changed when he shoved himself roughly into me. The position was wrong, and my skin felt like it was tearing. I screamed and pushed forward right into the coals. Tears exploded from my eyes, my body trying in vain to combat the sparks and the heat. The arm holding my head dragged me backwards, slightly dulling the heat. Before I could appreciate it, he slammed me into it again, deeper than before. It was thick and dry, and it felt like I was burning there too. My raw throat was struggling to keep screaming. He began to move consistently as I dissolved into broken wailing. His weight and movements were breaking me down. His thrusting was painfully hard, but deliberately slow. My body and mind were giving out. Not squealing anymore. He jerked forward in a thrust that shoved my whole body right back into the glowing coals. I began hoarsely screaming and writhing again as the flesh of my face began to fizzle. That really seemed to set him off. I kept trying to get away from the fire, but it was impossible with his weight slamming into me. Pain was devouring my face as he ground my head into the base of the fire. Somehow it wasn't enough to distract me from the last thrust stuck deep in me. The pulsing and twitching inside my bruised and bleeding body. Suddenly, to my relief, my head was pulled up and away from the coals. His fist in my hair and the painful position were nothing compared to the cool air replacing the fire. My comfort drained as he whispered next to my ear. Fun's over. I stared into the trees as I felt the blade drag slowly across my throat. I retched and felt the air and blood pour from my neck instead. I fell to the ground. I walked back to the clearing. I've made it to the meadow. I sat down and rested in the clearing. I heard a loud crack. I jumped at the loud sound and whipped around, looking for the source. I spotted it easily and stumbled backwards. I stared in horror at the bolt protruding from the tree next to me. I turned to where the end of the bolt was pointing out and saw him. Everything felt so slow, like I was trying to move during a nightmare. I saw the second bolt in the air, and I felt the punch and yank on my arm. I was knocked off balance and fell backwards with a soft thud. I was still a deer in headlights. I wanted to scream, but it felt like it was stuck inside my throat. Finally, I began to gain control of my body again and began to scramble as a boot landed on my chest. No, wait! You're not so hard to find, are you? I strained against his weight as he bent down. My eyes widened as he grabbed the bolt currently through my arm. No! He yanked it from my flesh in one mercilessly rough motion. I screamed loudly and clearly. This seemed to ring through the cold air. I realized he leaned closer as I gasped for air. You got an animal scream. Gets the heart pumping. Please don't hurt me, I spoke meekly. I had no other option. Already gone soft, He looked me right into the eyes and smiled fondly, like he was recounting a warm memory. There's something I really like about people. The critters around here never do any begging, but you're smarter than that. His voice and expression were so warm, but I was shivering. I could tell this wasn't the kind of fondness that meant anything good for me. He flashed a small grin. So, how's that leg holding up? His words made me look down. Dark blood was caked all over my thigh, soaked through my pants. I almost didn't notice him licking his thumb before he had it pressed to my wound on my leg. I had no time to react. I cried out hoarsely as he shoved his thumb deep into my thigh. My cry ended in a wheezing sob, so I tried to curl in on myself. The pain was blinding. Careful now. I began to shake involuntarily as he stood up. A hole like that's gonna slow you down. I tried to hold my injured leg with my bleeding arm. He stepped away from me, and to my surprise, began backing away. I just watched in confusion as he nodded to me once, and then turned around to walk away. What? He disappeared into the trees. Why was he leaving me? I squeezed my torn-up arm and tried to avoid thinking what I already knew was the answer. He was playing with me. I'm not going to last much longer like this. I have to do something. I pulled out the small knife from my bag and looked at my clothing. It's already so cold, but I'm losing too much blood. I started cutting some fabric from the bottom of my shirt. Once I had a couple strips, I began to tie them above the wounds on my arm and my leg. I winced in pain. I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish I wasn't here. I steeled myself and tied the knots tight. This should help me last a little longer at least. I walk into the trees. A cold wind rushes through the trees. I tried to shield myself from the bite. The pain in my limbs and face felt like tiny knives. I walked deeper into the woods. One of the trees stood out among the rest. It's a lot bigger. If I could get to the top, maybe I could find a way out of here. I stayed under the large tree. I watched the tiny clouds formed by my breath in the icy air. Somehow, it didn't seem so cold. I wasn't shivering anymore. I felt tired. Where was I again? I looked at the ground around me. Maybe if I just rest a little. I couldn't move my legs anymore. I finally felt warm. Maybe too warm. But I'm too tired to take my clothes off. I laid down on the ground. I'll just rest and everything will be fine. I closed my eyes. Just for a few minutes. He was chasing me. I ran through the trees. The hollow thud of my feet on rotting ground echoed my heartbeat. Wind and branches clawed at my body, desperately clinging tighter and tighter as I ran with more desperation. My footfalls increasing pace with the terror bubbling up, threatening to choke me. Then suddenly I spilled out into the open. I gasped and sucked in a breath. I filled myself with a damp and gentle decay. It was warm and welcome. A gravity pulls my attention to the water. Black water. The inky surface was as still as the night around me. Something pulled me. I stepped forward into the water. I wandered forward, deeper. It beckoned. As I slid deeper, my legs brushed against roots, claws, bones. So, you started to wander. I couldn't move. A deep sense of dread filled me to the core. Hunter's prey. This place and time will define you. I'll be waiting. I gasped as I woke up. I looked around myself and remembered where I was. I groggily got back up. I wait out the night. I looked blearily at the blood below me. I fell to the ground. I wheezed and tried to push myself up. My shaking arms wouldn't cooperate. A part of me felt like I should be panicking, but I was too exhausted. The sound of leaves rustling was a strange lullaby. It was cold, but my pain was fading. I struggled to breathe for a while, just listening to the life around me. My blood seeped into the ground, and then I closed my eyes. I quickly put out the fire. I began walking into the thicker brush. Something. I was hanging upside down. I took a moment to calm myself. I can't afford to keep making noise. After a few deep breaths, I looked up at the trap. My ankle was caught in a tight snare. The wire shone with a sinister glint. I suspected that it would be cutting into my flesh if it weren't for the boots I was wearing. I was beginning to lose feeling in my foot. I remembered the small knife I was given. If I can just get up to it. I grasped at my clothing and grunted, trying to get my hands to my feet. I was shaking and straining. Once I managed to get close, I held on tightly with one hand while fumbling for my knife. Once I had it, I frantically tried to cut at the wire holding my leg. I just kept sweating and sawing. Something in me refused to check my progress. My energy ran out before my denial could. I fell back away from my foot with a pained yelp. The force made the snare even tighter and pulled the knife out of my grip. I looked at my knife on the ground. The edge was completely ruined. I didn't damage the snare at all. I groaned in defeat. I was exhausted. Blood was rushing to my head, and it was getting harder to think. I don't know what to do. I dangled there, floating in and out of consciousness, unaware of how many times I had passed out. I realized that the thumping of blood in my ears was accompanied by other thumps, growing louder. I wriggled in place, trying to turn around. I could hear the crunch of the forest floor under his feet, and then his thick hands grasped my waist and turned me around. I couldn't stop a whimper from escaping from my throat. I didn't really think that this one was gonna work. I followed his gaze to the wire. He must be talking about the snare. He casually pulled out a small knife with a white handle. No. I wriggled in vain, completely unable to get any distance from him. Have you been waiting long for me? I panicked, trying to find something to slow him down. My eyes kept going back to the knife. That's an interesting knife. He paused. Then a warm smile spread over his face. Can't blame you for admiring. He flipped the knife in his hands. Sandy might have been my wife had I been more societally inclined. I squinted in confusion. He was looking at the knife so wistfully. I was willing to take the opportunity to draw this out. Sandy? Uh-huh. The knife glinted in his hands. I was a young, spry thing, and she was the prettiest girl in this village. I wasn't much of a proper kid, but I managed to ask her out on a date. I couldn't believe that he was actually talking. I tried to think of ways to escape while I nodded and urged him to continue. Wouldn't you be surprised that she agreed? So, I took her up camping. Real camping. None of that fancy tent nonsense, mind you. Anyhow, she got settled all happy and I went out and got a nice fat rabbit for dinner. I got to work cleaning, and she come running over. She looked up at me with those big old doe eyes. Scareder than the rabbit been. His voice became softer, as if this was somehow the most romantic part of the story. And I knew then just what I had to do. He rubbed the knife slowly, and I gulped. At some point, I had stopped thinking of escape plans and gotten all caught up in the story. That smooth, white knife hilt. It was definitely bone. My first real hunt. I squirmed in discomfort. I sincerely regretted asking about that knife. Well, that's enough talking. He easily pushed my coat down to my face, exposing my waist. The cold air on my skin sent a violent shiver through my body. I writhed as he moved the blade to my skin. Try and hold still. I cried out as I felt the blade sink into my belly. My cry became a blood-curdling scream as he dragged it down towards my ribs. I convulsed. The pain and the blood pounding in my head were making me dizzy. Hot blood was running up my body and over my face. I could feel his large hand slip into the hole in my torso. The sensation muted me. He was pulling things out of me. I could feel the weight of my organs shift to the outside of my body, between the blood pouring over my face and the pulling in my head. I felt like I was drowning. I didn't have the strength to writhe anymore. He worked quietly. All I could hear was the wet, constant dripping of my blood on the leaves below. The pain began to subside. Soon, all I could feel was dizziness and cold. Then, nothing at all. I searched around the dark forest floor for something useful. A glint just barely caught my eye. I looked closer and saw a wire. Around it was a strange display of raised sticks in a T shape. They were blending in before, but now they seemed obvious. As I followed the wire to the tree with my eyes, I suppressed a shudder. It's a snare. A really big one. I gulped. I'm really glad I spotted this before stepping in it. I touched the wire. It's sharp. I'm not leaving this up. I looked carefully for the ring of the wire at the base of the trap. Using a branch from the forest floor, I pushed the center stick of the contraption. The wire whipped up past me. I let out a relieved sigh. Not this time, asshole. I grabbed hold of the sturdier-looking branches and began to climb the tallest tree. After some progress, my limbs began to ache from the effort. I kept moving, trying not to look down. Finally, I saw light. I moved a bit higher up and saw the tops of the trees around me. It might have been beautiful if I had been in a different situation. I took a deep breath and looked around for any kind of road or something that could help me. I spotted the meadow I had been released in, and something dark. Something man-made. I squinted. It was definitely a cabin. I took note of the sun's position and where the cabin was. It looks like I can get to it from that meadow. A gust of wind shook the top of the tree as I clung to the branches. It's pretty cold and dangerous up here. I'd better go back down. I carefully climbed back down the tree to safety. I pulled out the crumpled paper and pencil. I need to remember where it was. I did my best to sketch something. This will probably be better if I draw some other locations too. I put it away. It'll have to do for now. I walked towards the cabin. I think I'm going in the right direction. I pushed past more trees. There. Suddenly, a break in the trees led to the side of a wooden cabin. To my frustration, there was no signs of any roads. Just thick forest on all sides. How the hell does he get out of here? I could try looking inside. Go inside the cabin. I slowly opened the door. I wasn't sure if I was shaking from the cold or from worry. I moved so slowly, terrified of making a sound. Eventually, I was able to peek my head inside. Dark. I opened the door and poked my head in. A hand pulled me in. Ah! Oh, I spent all day looking for you, and you're right here. I fumbled for my knife and tried to swipe at him. I yelped as he grabbed my weapon arm and twisted it behind my back. He slammed me face first into the cabin wall. I could feel him breathing behind me. I really did want this to last longer. Barely got any tracking in. He pressed me tighter and I wheezed. But, have you knowing where the cabin is? He let go of my arm and gripped both sides of my head. I felt a chill of recognition. No! With one practiced and brutally strong motion, he snapped my neck. I was unable to move or speak. I could only lie there for the next few seconds as my senses faded. I looked down at my flint. Now there's an idea. I'm going to die here, but I don't have to go down alone. There are dry twigs everywhere. I got close up to the cabin. I struck the flint. It only took a couple tries. My heart was pounding. The fire spread so quickly. 1 minute it was a flickering flame, and the next a towering inferno engulfing the front of the cabin. I could feel the heat, and I took a couple steps back and froze. Behind me, his thick arm was around my throat before I could turn around. My feet left the ground briefly from the force of it. I grasped at his elbow and tried to yell. I couldn't get much sound out. You! He was growling in my ear. Think you're clever, huh? The arm around my neck tightened. A strange twinge of pain told me that if he chokes me any harder, my neck will snap. Stop. My plea was ignored as he lifted my limp body. I heard the explosion of something inside the cabin and watched the flames tower higher. I felt another pop, but this time, it wasn't the fire. I couldn't feel anything, and yet the fire danced and I smiled. As I blacked out, I could hear him roaring in anger. The satisfied grin stayed on my face. My vision wavered. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It's nice and warm in here. I looked around the cabin and easily found a large bed. A real bed. I crawled into the soft surface. Like the rest of the furniture, it was covered in furs. Who cares anymore? It's just as dangerous anywhere else. I might as well be comfortable. I curled up on the blankets and furs and immediately dozed off. As I felt my body gently swaying for a moment, I was lost in time, living in the memory of being almost entirely asleep, as a parent carried me off to my bed. No, this isn't right. I jolted awake, going stiff at the face of the man holding me. Good morning, Goldilocks. Though I suppose it's more of an evening than a morning. This can't be real. I squirmed for a moment, and his grip immediately went from gentle to crushing. Aye, not so fast. You're all out of run anyway. A calloused hand squeezed my arm. I can feel you've gone all soft. How was he holding me so tightly? It felt like my bones were grinding together. I wheezed in pain. Then I realized he'd carried me outside. Where? I yelped as his arms opened up and dropped me hard to the ground. Before I could scramble to my feet, he grabbed me up off my coat and dragged the upper half of my body onto a large stump. He held my chest down. I suddenly felt strangely overwhelmed by my senses. The strong arm pinning me to the stump. The smell of freshly cut lumber. The painful surface of the marked up, jagged wood. And the movement in the corner of my eye. Was that... Oh, please, no. Don't worry. I'll do you quick. His boot replaced his hand on my back. The voice of defeat told me not to squirm anymore. I clenched my teeth and bared the back of my neck. I heard the dull thump and felt the force of the axe, but I didn't feel any pain. For one horrifying, dizzying moment, I could feel the world spinning without my body. And then, nothing. I walked towards the rocks. After following the sound of water, I came to a creek. The lazy stream was actually kind of pretty. It made me feel a little better. I approached the water of the creek. I could see movement under the water. Fish. Fish were fighting the current, even in the shallow parts of the creek. I saw some, barely moving, resting in the lee of the rocks. I quickly sprung into action. I ran back into the bush and found a long stick. I tried to move as quickly as possible. I didn't know how long the fish would be there. I kept an eye on one fish in particular, as I pulled out my small knife to whittle a point onto the stick. Once I was satisfied with my spear, I approached the creek again. My heart was pounding. I'm probably only going to have one shot at this. My target was practically still. I readied my weapon. Now! And with one furious splashing under my strike, I knew I had done it right. The other fish vanished as I waited for my victim to stop moving. I pulled it out, carefully. I did it. I really caught a fish. I slowly drift off to sleep. I awoke to a slam on my chest. I could barely make any sense of the pain as my brain struggled to wake up in the panic. A dark, enormous shape covered me. Then I heard the loud sniffing and began to make out some details in the dark. It's a bear. I screamed involuntarily and the bear reacted. Inches of claws sank into my chest with an impossible weight behind them. I fumbled for my knife. I managed to grasp it and take a swipe at the face in front of me. It screamed at me. I kept screaming as huge jaws clamped down on my neck. My screams became a gurgle as the flesh from my throat was torn away. I had no time to process anything. Thankfully, everything went dark rather quickly. In a way, as everything faded, I thought the beast was merciful. I shakily withdrew my knife and held it in front of me. For a split second, I saw the hollow reflection of an exhausted face in the metal. That can't be my face. My eyes are already dead. A cold wind turned the rustling leaves into a chaotic static. Already dead. I held the knife up to my throat. It's wrong that my body is still standing when the rest of me is dead already. I pressed it, testing the sensation of my blade digging into my skin. I thought of him, out there, hunting for me. He wants to feel my skin splitting open. I felt the burning slide of the metal and blood trickling down my neck. Well, my eyes rolled back. Blood was gushing now, and the pain was both intense and somehow far from me. He won't have that pleasure. I searched around me for something useful. I wandered through the trees trying to remember where I'd been. After several minutes of wandering, I spotted some color. 2 bushes, not very far apart, seemed to have berries on them. One had small purplish blueberries. They looked a bit like blueberries. The other had bright red, juicy-looking berries. These ones looked kind of like cranberries. The red berries seemed like the safe option. I picked all the ones I could find. I stopped in the trees. I pulled out my map and looked at it. It's hard to tell where I am in here, but it looks like there's a direction I haven't gone. I looked towards the north. The bush got a lot thicker. It might be hard to get through, but that means it's harder for him too. It might be worth it. I have to try it. I put away my map and walked forward, fighting through the growth. After struggling through the thickest part of the brush, I came to a clearing. Not a clearing. Some kind of a pond or swamp. It seemed strange that the water wasn't frozen in this cold. I looked back towards the trees before taking out my map. I'd better mark this place down. I put away my map and looked out at the still water. It's completely silent here. I eat the red berries. The berries were horribly bitter. I couldn't manage any more than a handful. A few minutes later, after eating them, I began to feel uneasy. I felt a strange pressure on my head. I shook my head, trying to get it to stop. Bright blue shapes exploded into my vision. I fell backwards. Fuck. Oh. I couldn't get up. The entire universe seemed to be swirling around me like a snow globe. I tried to gently lie down as the pain started. My stomach, all my guts were on fire. I was barely aware of myself anymore as I writhed and moaned on the ground. My heart was fluttering. The water. I sunk my fingers into the cold, damp earth. I pulled my body forward over the rocks and rotting leaves. Trees, roots, leaves, dirt, spines. Everything spinning. The air moved and breathed with me. Heavy pulsing. The water. The water is still. I touched the surface of the dark mirror. I clawed at the ground and dragged my body into it. Shaking, grasping, I plunged my hands into the bog. I pulled myself forward. I slipped under the surface, silently. The water closed around me. The buzzing, pulsing pain faded from my body. Gravity and light disappeared. Water, cool and soothing, flowed into me. I felt held. "You're here early." That cold voice. "Have you been lonely?" I made no answer. I couldn't. "I understand. I've been lonely too. And so empty. Don't worry. You can stay here. You will stay in the water." I searched the area around the water. The dying and dead foliage around the shore gave off an earthy smell. The water is so still. Every time I looked towards the swamp, I got an urge to walk in. There's something wrong with this place. Clouds again. I found myself staring up at the cold gray sky. I could scream, but no one would hear me. No one would understand or care. It felt as though sounds here were just swallowed up by the soft, colorless void. I've never heard such a silence. I've never felt so alone. I looked carefully around the tall grasses of the meadow. By the rotting remains of a tree trunk, I spotted something white. I looked more closely, brushing away the dirt and decaying leaves. Bones. It seemed like most of the skeleton was missing, but from what I could see, it looked like it was a deer. I remembered the creature from my dreams. Maybe these can help me. I gathered a couple of the most intact bones and put them in my backpack. I approached the dark water again. The same sense of dread from my nightmare began to rise in me. I gulped down my fear and stepped closer to the water. Trying not to get wet, I peered into it. Then I jumped back. Bones. It really is full of bones. I approached the edge of the inky swamp. Maybe I've gone crazy. I looked down at the bones I was holding. But if the nightmare was real, at the very least, this will make me feel better. I dropped the bones into the water. "You've returned, and you've brought me a gift." Voice was quiet and calm, but I couldn't quite tell where it was coming from. I couldn't look away from the unreal creature in front of me. Just like my nightmare, I couldn't move. "You're different, aren't you?" Didn't want me to respond. I slowly nodded. It seemed pleased. "Maybe it's time for the beast to meet his end." "Ray, Jack, I've seen his dreams. There's a loaded gun behind the bear's skin." My eyes widened. Is this thing serious? If I can just get it. Huh? Hello? And just like the breeze through the trees, I shook my head. Was that even "I'll be watching." I whipped around and looked for the source of the voice. Nothing but the swamp. I remembered what the voice from the swamp told me. I looked around the room and spotted a thick bear hide hung on the wall behind me. I tentatively grabbed it and looked behind it. I gasped. Carved in the wooden wall was a shelf just big enough to hold a Winchester rifle. A gun. I carefully grabbed it and checked. It's loaded. My heart pounded in my ears. This changes everything. I looked towards the cabin door. It looks like I'm the hunter now. I decided my best bet would be to wait here where it's warm. He has to come back here at some point. The minutes stretched into hours. They seemed to last days with how tense I was. I almost jumped up when I heard those heavy footsteps approaching from outside. This is it. I aimed the rifle at the door and tried to breathe evenly. The knob rattled. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. He swung the door open, and I fired. For what felt like a whole minute, we just sat there and stared at each other. Then, the spell was broken and he fell to his knees. For a moment, I saw something strange. The smallest smile, almost like he was proud. Or maybe I was just imagining things. He slumped to the floor, and I kept the rifle on him. I fired again, just to be sure. And he didn't move. It took several more minutes for me to gain enough courage to step forward and move again. He's really dead. I kicked the body. I began to breathe easily. Now, I just have to get out of here. As I tried to clear my head, I heard the faintest whisper. You did well, Hunter. Once again, I looked around in vain for the source of the voice. Then, I shook my head. I won't be distracted. I searched the cabin and the body. It didn't take long to find keys and a way out of here. I made my way back to civilization. I made my way back to my home. I never talked about what happened to me, or the man I killed. And after some time, for the most part, I managed to rest easy. Aside from the odd, strange nightmare about an endless river and a voice that told me I'd come home soon. I started walking towards the trees. Ah! Pain exploded up my leg. I looked down and saw a metal jaw clamped into the flesh of my ankle. I made a smothered sound as I tried to hold in another scream. The silence around me told me that I had already made far too much noise. I whimpered as I bent down to inspect the trap. It's a goddamn bear trap. Really? I gripped the two jaws and tried to pull them apart. They didn't budge at all. I breathed hard and put all my strength into it. They moved, but only the slightest bit. No, fuck! I let myself slump to the ground and suppress the urge to start crying. I examined my leg again. The teeth were deep in my flesh, but not quite to the bone. The pressure was cutting off my circulation. There's no way I could cut my leg off. Not with this tiny knife. I let out a whimper of despair. I have to pry it off. That's the only way out of this. I grabbed the jaws again and wrenched on them with every desperate muscle in my body. Please. Nothing. I can't. I let myself fall to the ground. I laid there in a daze of terror and pain. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The frozen ground began to numb my body until the snap of a twig behind me distracted me. I twisted my body to see the source of the sound. No. Ah, got yourself bit, did you? I wanted to scramble away, put any distance between him and myself. But the pain in my leg was too intense to move. He walked to me and looked at my ankle. And before I could process his intentions, he lifted his leg and stepped on my caught ankle. I howled in pain. Got you real good. I clenched my teeth and gripped handfuls of dirt to try and distract myself from the pain. He stepped off of me and clicked his tongue. Leg's no good to you now. I suppose we should just get it off, huh? My head was so fuzzy with pain and fear. What the hell did he mean, get it off? A white handle caught my eye. He was gripping a strange-looking knife. My breath caught in my throat. No. Please don't, please. I cringed as he bent low to cut the straps off my bag. Won't be needing this no more. He tossed the bag and its contents away from me. Stop, please, stop. He crouched down by my leg, completely ignoring my pleas. He pushed the knife into my leg above the jaws of the trap. I yelled again and squirmed, trying in vain to get away from the pain. He shifted his position and knelt down with his knee on my abdomen. His weight crushed the air out of me. I couldn't move at all. I frantically and uselessly gripped the back of his coat. Soon I felt a sickening pull as he gripped the tendons in my leg and sawed through them. I was shaking in pain and shock. I looked at my leg, and I wish I hadn't. All the flesh was peeled away. Knife ain't gonna cut through that. I could hear static. Oh, God, please just pass out. Unfortunately, the pain just kept me alert. He had gotten up. I could see my exposed bone, and it became clear what he was planning to do. I didn't have the energy to beg this time. I just sobbed as he positioned himself. I closed my eyes as he brought down his foot with all his weight behind it. I screamed in agony as my bones were shattered. And finally, I felt my consciousness slipping. I welcomed the loss of sensation. A pile of leaves caught my eye. Something about it bothered me. I looked around it. I don't think this was here before. I crouched near the leaves and lifted a few of them. Fuck! It's a damn bear trap. I nearly fell backwards. Glad I hadn't set it off. I took a few moments to calm down. Okay, I have to disarm this. I looked around and found an easily accessible large branch. I gulped and moved the branch over the trap. Please don't be too loud. I squeezed my eyes shut and brought the branch down onto the trap's center plate. Instantly, the crack of splintering wood rang out, and I felt the jerk of the wood in my hands. My hands felt clammy. It was hard not to imagine what that would have been like on my leg. I shook my head and dropped the branch. Now that that trap's no longer a danger, I wondered if I could possibly use it. Although, it looks really heavy. Dragging it around would be difficult. This is just too good of an opportunity. If I can figure out how to set this, I could really turn the tables. I grabbed the large metal device and lifted it over my backpack. I grunted. It must be at least 30 pounds. This better be worth it. I spotted a clamp on the table among some other metal tools. Wait. I could use that. I snatched the heavy tool. It's a bit rusty, but it's the perfect size. I swung the trap down off my back and laid it on the floor. I licked my lips in concentration and positioned the screw clamp around one of the springs. It took some effort to twist the screw, but I managed to actually push the spring down. Halfway there. I looked for something to keep the spring closed and spotted a C-shaped metal holder. It was the same rusty metal as the clamp. This must be what these tools are for. I placed the holder on the spring and got to work on the other side. I sweated with effort and nervously listened for footsteps. I'm so close now. There. Whew. I wiped my forehead and looked down at my handiwork. The savage-looking trap was set once again. Who even sells this shit? It must be illegal. I shook my head and got back to the task at hand. I needed a plan. I scanned the floor of the cabin for a good spot. Oh. I grinned at the large fur on the floor. Easy. I dragged the heavy trap over carefully and covered it gingerly with the skin. It's not as obvious anymore, but I still need him distracted. I gulped. The best bait would be me. I wanted to just leave the trap, but this would be the only way I could make sure he wouldn't see it. I steadied my nerves and took my position in the corner of the room. If he's looking for me, he won't see it. And if this doesn't work, I'd be dead eventually anyway. It really is the only way. I clenched my teeth and waited. I was wary and terrified, but I stayed alert. It felt like hours, until finally, I heard the rustling next to the door. Adrenaline flooded my body. This is it. The door creaked open, and there he was. He looked surprised for a moment, before gaining his composure. You came right to me, huh? I need to do something. I pulled out my little knife and got in a fighting stance. I like this. He pulled out his own knife. It wasn't much larger than mine. You're shaking like a leaf. I gritted my teeth and held my stance. Come on, just a little longer. I made a partial lunge forward. That was enough. He came at me quickly. You. I was frozen for a moment. It worked. Although, now he was between me and the door. A glint caught my eye. He dropped his knife. A shaky smirk crossed my lips. At the same time, a spark of fear showed in his eyes. He was practically growling, like a cornered animal. I climbed over the chair, just out of his reach, and got behind him. He awkwardly tried to turn to face me, but he froze when he felt my blade on his throat. I gripped his hair and pulled him back. Something inside me was roaring. Maybe it was just adrenaline. Maybe I'd just been through too much. I looked into his eyes. Fun's over. And with one overly harsh movement, I brought the blade through his neck. The gash was enormous and immediately poured blood out and onto the cabin floor. The grisly sight didn't bother me at all. Rather, I felt a rush. I felt high. Is this why he does all this? I wiped the blade on his motionless coat. After I made my kill, it was relatively easy to search the place at my leisure. I patched myself up and kept looking. I eventually found keys, a compass, and some crude notes about a stashed Jeep. He kept it covered far from the cabin. As I drove back to civilization, I felt like I was watching someone else. It was surreal. I was really going to go home. But I suppose I'll never be the same again.